I thought stiff joints were simply part of getting older, until a small change to my evening tea made me feel 20 years younger. Just 10 days later, I could bend, stretch, and walk without the burning ache I'd grown used to. The secret? A turmeric mix so simple you might already have the ingredients in your kitchen. Part 1. The Years of Stiffness. I was 81 when I finally admitted to myself that my body was not the same as it once was. Each morning, I would wake with joints so stiff it felt as if they had been glued in place overnight. My knees would creak, my hips resisted movement, and even my hands seemed unwilling to close into a comfortable fist. At first, I thought this was just how aging worked: you move less, you accept discomfort, and you learn to live with limitations. But deep down, I longed for something more than just coping. I wanted to walk without wincing, to stand up without bracing myself against a chair, and to greet the day without feeling weighed down by my own body. The stiffness crept in gradually, over the course of years. I could no longer kneel in the garden without paying for it later. Climbing stairs became a slow, deliberate process. Even my daily walk to the mailbox, once a small pleasure, had become a chore. I had tried creams, heat packs, and supplements that promised miracles, but nothing seemed to make a real difference. It wasn't until I stumbled across an old, handwritten recipe in a health book that I began to wonder if the answer might be far simpler than I imagined. Part 2. A Discovery Hiding in Plain Sight. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through books in my study, I found a faded notebook tucked inside the pages of an herbal remedies guide. Inside, in careful cursive writing, was a recipe for a golden tea made with turmeric, black pepper, and a few other spices. The note claimed it could warm the joints, soothe stiffness, and restore ease of movement within days. I almost laughed. How could something so ordinary make such bold promises? But as I read further, I saw references to turmeric's anti-inflammatory compounds, especially curcumin, and how combining it with black pepper increased its absorption in the body. I remembered hearing about turmeric before, in cooking shows, in health articles, but I had never taken it seriously as a remedy. Still, the idea intrigued me. The mix required no exotic ingredients, no expensive powders, and no complicated preparation. Just turmeric, black pepper, a hint of cinnamon, and a small amount of ginger, stirred into warm tea. The instructions suggested drinking it in the evening, allowing the body to rest and repair overnight. I decided to give it a chance. After all, what did I have to lose? Part 3. The First Evening Ritual. That night, I measured out the ingredients exactly as written: 1 teaspoon of turmeric powder, a pinch of freshly ground black pepper, a quarter teaspoon of cinnamon, and half a teaspoon of grated ginger. I stirred them into a steaming cup of chamomile tea, the scent both earthy and comforting. The first sip was warming, with a slight peppery kick. I felt an unexpected calm settle over me, as if my body was already beginning to loosen its grip on the tension I had carried for so long. I made a quiet promise to myself: I would drink this tea every evening for 10 days, without fail. I didn't expect instant results. I simply wanted to see if the old recipe held even a fraction of the truth it claimed. That first night, I slept deeply, waking only once instead of the usual 3 or 4 times. The next morning, while my joints were still stiff, they didn't feel quite as heavy or unyielding. It was a small change, but enough to make me curious about what might happen if I kept going. Part 4. Subtle Shifts in the Body. By the 3rd day of drinking my turmeric tea each evening, I noticed something almost imperceptible. My morning walk to the kitchen didn't feel quite as labored. Normally, the first few steps after getting out of bed were the most difficult. My knees would click, my ankles would resist, and my hips would take their time waking up. But that morning, while still slow, my movements felt smoother, as if a bit of rust had been polished away. I told myself it might just be my imagination. After all, 3 days was hardly enough time for any significant change. But as the hours passed, I found I could sit and stand with less groaning from my joints. Even reaching for something from a low cabinet wasn't as daunting as before. I began to look forward to my nightly tea, treating it as more than just a drink. It became a small, personal ritual, a quiet signal to my body that it was time to heal. Part 5. Understanding why it works. My curiosity got the better of me, so I began reading more about turmeric and its active compound, curcumin. Scientific research had been clear for years. Curcumin has powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. Inflammation is the body's natural response to injury or irritation, but when it becomes chronic, it can damage tissues, stiffen joints, and accelerate the wear and tear that so many older adults experience. Curcumin helps by reducing the production of inflammatory chemicals in the body, allowing tissues to repair themselves more effectively. But here's the part that caught my attention: curcumin is poorly absorbed on its own. This is why the old recipe included black pepper. Piperine, the active compound in black pepper, enhances curcumin absorption by as much as 2,000%. Cinnamon, I learned, not only added warmth to the flavor but also had its own anti-inflammatory and blood sugar stabilizing effects, while ginger supported circulation and reduced swelling. This was no random mix of spices, it was a carefully crafted blend, designed to work together. Part 6, the 10-day turning point begins. By the 6th evening, I realized the changes were becoming harder to dismiss. I could climb the stairs without gripping the railings so tightly. I could bend down to tie my shoes without having to pause midway. Even simple movements, like turning to look behind me or rising from a chair, felt more fluid. My sleep had improved, too. Where I once woke several times in the night with aching hips or a throbbing back, I now slept in longer stretches, waking with a sense of lightness in my limbs. My hands, which often felt stiff in the mornings, were more flexible, making it easier to grip a pen or hold a cup. I hadn't realized how much the stiffness had been draining my energy until it started to lift. It was as if I'd been carrying a quiet burden for years, and now, piece by piece, it was falling away. I knew I was still only halfway through my 10-day experiment, but I began to suspect that this small, golden cup of tea might be one of the most valuable discoveries I had ever made for my health. Part 7, the 10th day. On the morning of the 10th day, I woke before the sun, as I often did, but this time there was something different. My legs swung over the side of the bed without hesitation, my feet met the floor with ease, and my first steps toward the window were steady. There was no familiar jolt of pain in my knees, no deep ache in my hips. Instead, my body felt light, almost eager to move. I stood there for a moment, surprised, quietly bending my knees and rotating my ankles, testing this new ease of motion. It was real, the stiffness that had once defined my mornings had loosened its hold. As I walked into the kitchen, I thought about all the mornings I had dreaded over the past few years, the slow, shuffling movements, the sighs of discomfort, the resigned acceptance that this is just what happens when you're older. But here I was, at 81, feeling not just relief but a renewed sense of possibility. The turmeric mix had not only changed how my body moved but also how I felt about my days ahead. I could plan walks again. I could return to light gardening. I could live with more ease. Part 8, the quiet science of healing. As remarkable as it felt, I knew there was more to this than simple luck. Over those 10 days, my body had been quietly responding to the anti-inflammatory effects of curcumin, the circulation-boosting benefits of ginger, and the metabolic support of cinnamon. Each night, while I rested, these compounds were at work, reducing swelling in joint tissues, improving blood flow to muscles, and protecting cartilage from further wear. Studies have shown that consistent turmeric intake can help reduce markers of inflammation such as C-reactive protein, CRP, in the blood, a key indicator of joint-related issues. The black pepper in my mix ensured that these benefits weren't just passing through my digestive system and used but were actually entering my bloodstream, where they could do their work. It was a reminder that healing often happens slowly, steadily, and in ways we might not notice until suddenly, everything feels different. Part 9, the small ritual that stayed. The 10th day was meant to be the end of my little experiment, but I didn't stop. I couldn't imagine going back to evenings without my golden tea. It had become more than a remedy, it was a comfort, a grounding practice that signaled the day's end and invited my body into a state of repair. I began pairing it with other small changes. I stretched gently before bed, drank more water throughout the day, and made sure to get at least a short walk in the mornings. But the tea was always at the heart of it. friends began to notice I moved differently. I laughed more easily. I even stood longer during conversations without feeling the need to sit. My joints weren't just less stiff, they felt supported, cared for, and, in a way, renewed. Part 10. Expanding the benefits beyond joints. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed that the improvements weren't limited to my joints alone. My digestion felt smoother, my skin seemed less dry, and even my energy throughout the day felt more balanced. I had read that turmeric's antioxidant properties don't just target inflammation, they also combat oxidative stress, a process that silently damages cells and accelerates aging. For years, I had accepted the small irritations of aging, the occasional brain fog, the mid-afternoon slump, the unpredictable sleep. But now, I began to see how interconnected everything was. When inflammation levels dropped, my sleep improved, my energy increased, and my mood lifted. It was as if my body had been carrying a quiet background struggle for years, and with that burden eased, it could finally focus on maintaining my overall well-being. I realized that the turmeric tea wasn't a magic cure, it was more like a key, unlocking my body's ability to heal itself more effectively. And that was perhaps the most empowering part of the experience. Part 11. The role of consistency. In the beginning, I had thought of this as a short trial. But by the fourth week, it became clear that the benefits depended on consistency. Skipping the tea for even 2 nights seemed to bring back a faint hint of stiffness in my mornings. It was never as severe as before, but it was a clear reminder that the effects were cumulative, not permanent without continued care. That's when I decided this wouldn't just be a remedy I turned to in times of discomfort, it would be part of my daily life, as essential as brushing my teeth or drinking water. The ritual itself was soothing, heating the water, measuring each spice, watching the golden swirl bloom in the cup, and taking that first fragrant sip. It gave me something to look forward to at the end of the day, and I truly believe that the act of slowing down and caring for myself added to the healing process. Part 12. Encouraging others to try. When my neighbor, Margaret, mentioned her own troubles with stiff hands, I shared my turmeric tea routine with her. She was skeptical at first, worried that it would taste too strong or that it was just one of those health fads. But I told her exactly what I had experienced, the gradual but undeniable improvement, the deeper sleep, the lighter mornings. Within 2 weeks, she called me to say her hands felt more flexible, and she could open jars without as much strain. That conversation reminded me that so many people live with discomfort simply because they believe it's an unchangeable part of aging. I used to believe that too. Now, I knew better. Small, natural changes, especially when grounded in science, could make an extraordinary difference. Part 13. Perfecting the turmeric mix. By the time I was a month into my turmeric tea routine, I had fine-tuned the recipe to suit both taste and effectiveness. I kept the foundation the same: 1 teaspoon of turmeric powder, a pinch of black pepper, a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, and 1/2 teaspoon of fresh ginger, but I began experimenting with different tea bases. Some nights, I used chamomile for relaxation, other nights, I chose green tea for its extra antioxidants. Occasionally, I added a teaspoon of honey for its natural antibacterial properties and gentle sweetness. I learned that the temperature of the water mattered, too. Boiling water could dull the flavor of the spices, while water that was too cool wouldn't draw out their full potency. The perfect balance was just off the boil water, hot enough to extract the beneficial compounds but gentle enough to preserve their aroma and taste. Drinking it slowly, while still warm, seemed to enhance the soothing sensation that spread through my body as I sipped. Part 14. Tips to boost its effects. I also discovered a few small habits that made the turmeric tea work even better for me. First, I avoided heavy meals right before drinking it, so my body could absorb the compounds without being slowed down by digestion. Second, I paired it with gentle evening stretches, nothing strenuous, just enough to encourage blood flow and keep my joints mobile. And third, I stayed mindful of hydration during the day, as proper fluid balance supports joint lubrication and nutrient delivery. Over time, I realized that this wasn't just about the tea itself, but about creating an environment in which the tea could work most effectively. The warmth of the drink relaxed my muscles, the spices reduced inflammation, and my lifestyle choices supported their long-term benefits. It was a full-circle approach, simple yet powerful. Part 15, the long-term view. By the third month, the changes felt embedded in my daily life. My joints weren't just better, they were dependable. I could plan outings without worrying about fatigue halfway through. I could bend, twist, and carry light grocery bags without hesitation. The confidence that came with reliable mobility was just as valuable as the physical improvement itself. I also noticed that I had reduced my reliance on over-the-counter pain relievers. I still kept them in the cupboard, but I no longer reached for them at the first sign of discomfort. The tea had shifted my mindset. Instead of reacting to pain after it came, I was now preventing it from taking hold in the first place. And perhaps the most surprising change was how many people around me began their own turmeric routines after hearing my story. It turned into a quiet movement among friends and neighbors, each of us reclaiming a little more freedom in our daily lives, one golden cup at a time. Part 16, Addressing the Common Doubts. When I began sharing my turmeric tea experience with others, I quickly learned that curiosity often came with hesitation. Some worried that turmeric might upset their stomach, while others questioned whether it would interfere with medications. These are valid concerns, and I always reminded them that, while turmeric is generally safe in culinary amounts, it's wise to speak with a doctor before adding it as a daily remedy, especially for those on blood thinners or with gallbladder issues. Another concern was the taste. Turmeric has a distinct, earthy flavor that not everyone enjoys at first. I explained that the cinnamon and ginger in my mix soften the flavor, and a small amount of honey or lemon could make it even more pleasant. In fact, many who initially resisted the taste came to associate it with comfort and relaxation, just as I had. Part 17, Encouragement for the Hesitant. I often think about how close I came to dismissing that old recipe in the faded notebook. If I had ignored it, I might still be struggling with the same daily stiffness, believing that there was nothing I could do. I share my story not to claim that turmeric tea is a miracle cure, but to remind people that simple, natural steps can sometimes bring unexpected and profound change. For those who hesitate, I suggest treating it as an experiment. Commit to 10 days, just as I did. The worst that could happen is you discover a warm, soothing evening drink. The best that could happen is you regain mobility, comfort, and the joy of movement. The cost is minimal, the process is simple, and the potential reward is worth far more than the effort. Part 18, The Lasting Gift. Now, months after that first cup, turmeric tea remains a constant in my evenings. The golden swirl in my mug is more than a blend of spices, it's a reminder that change is possible at any age. At 81, I've learned that the body still listens when you give it the right care, and even the smallest rituals can lead to the greatest transformations. Some nights, as I sip the tea and feel its warmth spread through me, I think of all the years I accepted stiffness as my fate. Then I think of the last 10 days of that first experiment, the gradual release, the lightness returning to my steps, and I am grateful I gave myself the chance to try. And so I tell anyone who will listen, don't give up on your body. It is capable of more than you realize, and sometimes, all it needs is the right nudge, perhaps in the form of a golden cup of turmeric tea.